However, as we have started that we are trying to check or to ascertain the differences between a phrase, a clause, and a sentence, we need to know the definition of each of these, so that when we come across them in the English language, we know what we are dealing with. Now, basically, in English language, when we put up some expressions or we write up some things, what we write actually ends as a sentence. But before we arrive at having a sentence, which can also be an expression, we start from a phrase. Now, by the time we add one or two things together, or we have some build-ups, we can have a clause. And then having one or two things added to the clause, we have a sentence. So now, what I really want to clarify today is that according to some school of thoughts, a clause is not the same as a sentence. So in a way for us to differentiate between a clause and a sentence, we need to visit what a phrase is. Because basically, a phrase is the beginning, or let's say the foundation of how a sentence is built grammatically. So without further ado, we'll go into the definition of these terms. Now, let's begin with a phrase. What is a phrase? What is a phrase? Phrases are words brought together in a grammatical form or having a grammatical formation in such a way that it does not have a subject or a verb. What we are trying to say is this, that when you are calling something a phrase, it is just words brought together that does not have a definite definition of a subject or a verb in it. Otherwise, I can say that a kind of composition in that there is no identification of a subject or a verb in it is what we call a phrase. And we said that because a phrase has neither a subject nor a verb, it can't form a predicate. Now, according to the traditional grammarians, they believe that a sentence or an expression is divided into two parts, the subject and the predicate. Now, the subject is the actor in a sentence. That is, anytime you give an expression or anytime you make a sentence or you write a sentence. Now, a particular action is done. A particular action is expressed or a message is passed across in the sentence. Now, for that message to be passed across or for that action to be done, we need an actor. So now, the actor in a sentence is what we refer to as the subject. However, anything outside the subject is what we call a predicate. So if, for instance, I say, Ade is going to school. Ade is going to school. In that expression, Ade has taken a particular action, and that action is to go. Now, Ade in that sentence is the actor, or what we call the subject. Now, immediately after Ade, every other thing that expands from the verb down to the last word in the sentence, we call that section the predicate. So what we're trying to say is this. Grammatically, a sentence is divided into two sections. The subject section and the predicate section. The subject section and the predicate section. So what we need to know from there is that a phrase has neither a subject nor a verb. So it means it cannot form a predicate. So for us to have something that we call a predicate, there must be a finite verb in it. And we are saying that it can be very short or can be quite long. It may not be very long, because if you're going to make a very long phrase, it is possible, or there's a tendency that we add a finite verb into it. And once we add a finite verb to it, it is no longer a phrase. So for us to actually know what a phrase is, it means that it will neither have a subject nor a finite verb, and then it will not be able to form a predicate. Moving up from there quickly, these are examples of phrases. After dinner. Now imagine me just coming to any of you and I just open my mouth and I tell you, after dinner. There are several questions that you wrap around it. What has happened after dinner? What is wrong with after dinner? Is there anything you want me to know after dinner? Now, you realize that me just saying after dinner and then leaving, it means I've not been able to pass any complete thoughts. I've not been able to express any complete thought. So in another way, what we're trying to say is this. In another way, what we're trying to say is this. A phrase will not express a complete thought. So if you have anybody saying anything and you realize that you cannot wrap any meaning around that thing, it means the person has just given a phrase and not a clause or a sentence. So we need to be careful while we are trying to make an expression or while we are writing, such that what we think to be a clause or a sentence is not just a phrase. Because I want you to know that a phrase cannot do anything, cannot express anything in a sentence. A phrase will just be there for a grammatical representation. And we said that phrases cannot be used alone, but you can use them as part of a sentence where they are used as part of speech. Now, in some other classes, we'll start talking about the different type of phrases that we have, the different type of clauses that we have, and the different type of sentences that we have. But what this is trying to tell us is this. You cannot use a phrase alone. You can only use them as part of a sentence. So don't be surprised when I say that in a sentence, we can have a noun phrase, we can have a verb phrase, we can have an adjectival phrase, we can have a prepositional phrase, we can have an adverbial phrase, a prepositional phrase, and so on and forth. So a phrase cannot be used alone. Rather, they can be used as part of a sentence. Or what I can say is that by the time you bring several phrases together, you may be able to form a clause. And by the time we get into the meaning of a clause, you understand this better. So moving up from there. Now, what is a clause? Remember, we have said that a phrase is just words coming together without a complete thought given or without a complete thought expressed. Now, what is a clause? We said clauses are a group of words, or we can say clauses are groups of phrases that are both subjects and predicates. I will quickly take us back. Remember, we said for a phrase, they are a group of words without a subject or a verb. But by the time we got into the definition of a clause, we said a clause is a group of words that have both a subject and predicates. Now, unlike phrases.
Oh, sorry, excuse me, sir. Sorry. Asobalis, please mute yourself. You are disturbing the class. Miss Tura, though there's no background noise, but you can mute yourself. Same as Kudirat. Please, all of you that are muted, that are unmuted, please mute yourself so that you won't disturb the class. You can go ahead, sir. And please, if you have any question, maybe you don't understand what is going on, try to ask questions. If you are in a place that is silent, you can unmute yourself to talk. But if you are not, you can type. Please go ahead, sir. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay. So now we said, unlike phrases, a clause sometimes acts as a sentence. So which means there are some situations where you can use a clause to represent a sentence. Now, by the time we get to the bottom of all this, we'll know why we are trying to differentiate a phrase from a clause and a clause from a sentence. Now, but what we're trying to say about the clause is this, that as much as a clause is an independent grammatical structure, it can also be used as a sentence, but not in all cases. There are some clauses that cannot be taken as sentence or cannot be used as sentences. So that is why we have to be careful of what we'll say, or when we try to generalize that all clauses are sentences. No. We can use a clause as a sentence in some circumstances, but not all clauses can be used as sentences. Now, in trying to differentiate the types of clauses that we have some clauses that can express a thought, that can tell us and give us a message directly. And at the same time, we have some clauses that cannot express a thought or cannot pass a message across. Rather, they can only be attached to a clause that can give us.
Sorry, sir. Alice. Alice. Sorry for the interruption. Please mute yourself so that we can enjoy the class. Okay, please mute yourself. Please, you can go ahead.
Okay. Now, what I was trying to say is this. A clause can be used as a sentence, but not all clauses can be used as sentences. And I was saying that for us to prove that, there are some clauses that can express a complete thought, that can pass a message directly without causing any ambiguity or causing confusion. However, there are some clauses that they cannot express a complete thought. Rather, they can be attached to a clause that can pass a direct message or that can express a complete thought. So now, a clause that can express a complete thought is an example of what we call an independent clause. So from the word, the way how we have pronounced it or what we have said, an independent clause, a clause that can stand on its own, a clause that can function on its own whims and caprices, a clause that can dictate its meaning in itself. But a subordinate clause is always attached to an independent clause to have its meaning actualized. Now, what we are trying to say is this. A subordinate clause will have a meaning in it, but it may not be actualized until it is attached to an independent clause. Now, let us put it this way. let's take, for instance, in a place of work, we may not be able to reckon with the workers until we have a team lead or somebody that we call a manager. That is why some of us, when we have some issues with our bank account or we have anything to do at the bank. Now, we can say that immediately we get to the bank and want to get some things done. The first thing we do is we ask after who is the person in charge. Now, the person in charge represents the independent clause that we know or we put a certain belief in the person such that we know that any of the problem that we have gone to that place with, they can solve it. So now let's put the independent clause and the subordinate clause in that scenario. An independent clause is that manager that can give you the statement, the message that you want at a go. But a subordinate clause will have to depend on an independent clause to get its meaning. So another name for a subordinate clause is a dependent clause, a clause that depends on another clause to have its meaning actualized. So, however, the only type of clause that it can depend on is an independent clause. However, in another way to make this more clearer, we can say that an independent clause can also be called a main clause. And then a dependent clause can also be called a subordinate clause. So it is either you say you have an independent and a dependent clause, or a main clause and a subordinate clause. So that is how you differentiate them. Now, for you to know how subordinate or dependent clauses are formed, here is an example. When the man broke into the house. Now, if you open your mouth and you say, when the man broke into the house, in a way or two, there is a message passed in it. It is just that the message is not clear enough. The message is not clear enough. So we may need something to balance of that thought or that message, such that when you reproduce the complete statement, it passes the exact information that it was supposed to. So when I say, when the man broke into the house and I keep my mouth shut, you will want to ask several questions. Okay, what happened to the man when he broke into the house? Was there anything whatsoever from there and there? So it means for you to have given a statement and you realize that there are several questions over and around it for those that have listened to get into the right message or the real message of that statement. It is a subordinate clause or a dependent clause. However, for an independent clause or a main clause, just as I said, it will pass the message across plainly. That is why we said an independent clause is a clause that itself expresses its meaning. So while we were saying that a clause can also be used as a sentence, the type of clauses that we are talking about are independent clauses. So in a way to refine that and place that straight, we can say that independent clauses can be used as sentences. Independent clauses can be used as sentences. So now, we have been given an example of a subordinate clause. We have been given an example of a main clause. So by the time we join these together, you realize that we form a complete thought. So we can say, the dog barked at him when the man broke into the house. Or we can say, when the man broke into the house, the dog barked at him. Now, joining both together, you realize now that we have a broader information, more on what the independent clause has given to us, and more to complete what the subordinate clause intended to give to us. Now, moving away from that quickly, while the independent clause could be used by itself as a complete sentence, the subordinate clause could not. So just as I said earlier, you can see how the sentence is formed. Look at it here. When the man broke into the house, the dog barked at him. You can see that that is a complete thought now. So without wasting our time, let's move on to the last part, a sentence. What is a sentence? A sentence has a subject and a predicate and can often be composed of more than one clause. Now, I want to take us back from phrases. Now, we said phrases are a group of words brought together without a subject or a verb. Now, we said a phrase is a group of words that has no subject and no verb. And we said that a phrase cannot form a predicate. When we moved up to a clause, we said a clause.
Sorry, sir.
Is, yes, sir?
Someone has a question. The person said he needs a little explanation on what the word predicate means.
Okay, good. Now, I said, when I was explaining the other time, I said, grammatically, there's a school sentence divided into two parts, subject section and the predicate section. Now, let's take, for instance, I make a statement such as, Ade is going to school. Now, in every sentence, a complete sentence, there will be an action, and there may be something that will receive the action, or in a sentence. For you to read this, you are able to identify your subject or your actor. Now, it's somebody that does an action or performs an action in a sentence. So another name for your actor is the subject. So now, once you remove a subject from a sentence, every other thing, starting from the verb to the end of that sentence, is what we call the predicate section. I hope that is understood. So a sentence is divided into two parts, the subject and the predicate. The subject could be a phrase, it could be a clause, it could be a word. I get it. But that formation or that section will actually be what is working as the actor in the sentence. But once you are able to identify the actor, every other thing starting from your verb to the end of that sentence is what we refer to as the predicate. I hope that is understood now. Okay, now, so I was trying to come from phrases to clauses and then hitting on sentences. And then I said earlier that I wanted to remind us that a phrase will be without a subject and a verb. And then we said a clause has both subject and predicates. However, moving up to a sentence now, we said that a complete sentence has a subject and a predicate, more like saying that a sentence has the same definition as a clause. But what has differentiated a sentence from a clause is this. A clause is a formation, a particular definite formation that has a grammatical understanding and representation. But a sentence is that group that contains or may contain more than one clause. So we could say that a sentence has two or more clauses. So for us to form a sentence, sometimes we may need an independent clause and a dependent clause, or we have a main clause and a subordinate clause to form a sentence. There are some school of thoughts that believe that a clause does not have the same grammatical power as a sentence. That is why we cannot say that we have several types of clauses as we do to the several types of sentences. This is what I mean, don't get confused. We have just two types of clauses, a main clause and a subordinate clause, or a dependent clause and an independent clause. But when it comes to sentences, we have four types of sentences, depending on the category we want to place it. But grammatically, when we talk about structurally, a sentence has four types. Though some school of thought will tell us we have three, but basically we can still have four. The first one is a simple sentence. The second one is a compound sentence. The third one is a complex sentence. And the last one is a compound complex, or what we call a multiple. Now, for this category that I've just listed, we do not have clauses exemplified in those ways. So it is only a sentence that you can say that we have something that we call, or a particular formation that we call a simple sentence, a particular formation that we call a compound sentence, a particular formation that we call a complex sentence, and a particular formation that we call a compound complex or a multiple. But for clauses, we just have two, a main clause and a subordinate clause. So without wasting our time on it, you can see we have an example. You ate fish. You ate fish. That is an example of a sentence, more like saying that just a clause. So this here given is full of a simple sentence. So a simple sentence can also be tantamount to a clause, an independent clause. I'll forget that. So moving on from there, more complex sentences can combine multiple clauses or phrases to add additional information about what is described. That is, when you are talking about complex sentences, you can add more clauses, more phrases to make your sentence lengthy or bogus. And for you to have a sentence, sometimes you need clauses to be combined using your conjunction. I believe you're familiar with conjunctions. And then we are taking a class on that. In our past classes, we have talked about the part of speech, and then we are dealt with conjunctions. So these are some of the examples. We have and, we have but, we have or, and so many other ones. So what this is trying to tell us is that sometimes for you to have a sentence, you may need a conjunction to join the clauses that you have in your sentence. So when you're trying to bring all this together, what we are trying to say is that by the time you join phrases together, you bring them together to form a clause. You bring clauses together, you form a sentence. That is the whole idea of this. So lastly, for this class, you can look at it. We said he went out to dinner, but didn't enjoy the meal. Now, in this sentence, we have two sentences, or what we can call two independent clauses. The first one is he went out to dinner. Yes, that's a message passed across already. That's a meaning passed across already. That's a perfect expression given. And the second one is he didn't enjoy the meal. Now, these two independent clauses are joined together by the conjunction but. By the conjunction but. If you remember vividly, when we're talking about conjunctions, we said there are some conjunctions that are called coordinating conjunctions, and there are some that are called subordinating conjunctions. Now, this is an example of a coordinating conjunction because it is trying to bring two independent clauses together to form a sentence. Had it been it is a subordinating conjunction, it will be adding a dependent clause to an independent clause. But basically today, we just want to rush through what each of these terms mean and how they are represented grammatically. So as a way to wrap up this class, I'll just take us through all we have been saying since morning. We've been talking about the phrase, the clause, and the sentence, the differences between the three of them. And then we said a phrase is a group of words without a subject or a verb. And we said that a phrase cannot form a predicate. And remember, I told you that in a sentence, once you have identified your subject or you have removed your subject, anything starting from the verb to the end of the sentence is what we call a predicate. So a phrase cannot form a predicate. Moving up from there, we went into a clause, and we're able to say that a clause is a group of words that have both subject and predicates. And we said that a clause can be used as a sentence. However, I pointed out that not all clauses can be used as sentences because we have independent clauses and dependent clauses. Independent clauses can be used as sentences, while dependent clauses cannot be used as sentences. Why? Independent clauses can give a complete thoughts. And a dependent clause can always or will always depend on an independent clause to have its meaning actualized. Though in both of them, there are meanings hidden to them. There are messages hidden there. But for a dependent clause to have its meaning actualized, it must be attached to an independent clause. Or we can say that a main clause and a subordinate clause. A main clause will pass a complete message, a complete expression. But a subordinate clause will have the meaning in it depending on the main clause to have it expressed. And then I give an example as we have it in our slide. And lastly, we went to a sentence. And we're able to say that a sentence is a complete sense having a subject and a predicate. And we say it may have more than one clause. So when you have more than a clause coming together, joined together by a coordinating conjunction, you have a sentence. So that is where we'll stop for today. Thank you for your time. My assignment will be that you try as much as possible to write sentences, and then you identify phrases, you identify clauses, and then you bring them together to form your sentence. Thank you for your time. Good day.